It is Monday, it is 7 o'clock, which means it is time for Model Monday. We are going to continue our Orrery project. This is part 5 of a 27-part series where we make a Sun, Earth, Moon model of those things and how they move with each other, with gears and whatnot. We have finally completed the gears section of this course, which is, I'm sure everybody is excited about, because you don't have to draw any more gears. But we do have to have a way to hold these gears together, and because they're not just gonna hold themselves together. They're not magic, unlike the way that gravity works, which is through magic, I assume. Magnets, maybe. Who knows? All right, so, but we've got all of our gears working with each other, which is super cool. And next we need to find a way to mount all these things together. We are going to do that with a pretty simple support mechanism that runs underneath the unit. It's just a simple bar that's got pins that all of our gears will rotate on, and then a little support structure on either side to make sure it doesn't dip from all that weight, because it's going to be supported in the middle, and then the end will be left to rotate around the outside here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to start a new component. So I've got my main document component as my active component here, right up here at the top. My Orrery from class is what I've called this file here in Fusion 360. And I'm going to come up to my Create menu and choose the New Component option here. And this component is going to be called, I don't know, our support bar, or support structure,
frame.
Or frame. That works too. In fact, I think that's an even better word, frame. All right, so this is our frame, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and it will make that our active component. And now we can just kind of jump in and get going here. So I'm going to rotate to the underside of this mechanism here, just so I can see the underside of my gears. And I'm going to create a new sketch inside of this component. I'll just go ahead and click Create, and then Create Sketch. And I'm going to create this sketch on the bottom face of my lowest most gear. So we've got kind of a stack of 2 gears in places. So I want to create a surface, or a sketch that kind of exists on one of the lowest gears. So for me, that middle one serves that purpose. And I can spin around so we can look at this, so we can see
My
here.
gears just kind of turn dim, and they're almost impossible to see.
Yeah, so that they're all ghosted out because our currently active component is our frame, and none of the bodies that we see in our drawing view are inside of our frame component, so they're all kind of ghosted out. Which makes it a little bit more challenging to see them for sure. But if you hover over them, they still highlight. So you can kind of get a feel for where things are in space kind of by hovering over them. And then they'll highlight the appropriate color, or just kind of show you where they're located. Cool?
No. It just went, I tried clicking on the bottom of my gear, I don't know what I hit, and it just went wonky.
Looks like you're editing a sketch currently. Yeah, because you got your sketch palette open.
Right, but I mean, it rotated the whole thing over.
Yeah, that's all right.
It doesn't matter,
If
okay.
it rotates it, yeah, you might, if you hover over like the upper part of your cube to the right, where you got those two arrows.
Yeah.
You can use those to kind of reorient yourself if you want to. All right, so now that we're creating our sketch here, I want to start by kind of locating the centers of my gears. So from the Create menu, I'm going to come up to this Project Include option, and then over to Project. It's also the P key on the keyboard for those people who like to use keyboard shortcuts. And if I choose that Project option, now as I hover over the center of my gears, I get a little red dot. And that little red dot is the center of each one of these gears. So I'm going to hover over that red dot. I'm going to hover over the center until I get that red dot underneath my cursor, and then I'll just click on it, and that red dot will become a purple dot, and that is a projected sketch item. And we can do that for each of the 4 gear centers that we got to kind of locate here. So I'm going to do those kind of in sequence here, hover over it until I get the little red dot, and then I'll click on that red dot, and then that red dot turns into a purple dot. One more to go for me is way over here on the right. We can see in my project window that I've got 4 items selected. And that makes sense because each one of those little center points for each one of my gears is selected and projected over. So I've taken geometry that exists in other components. In fact, it's kind of interesting. I've never noticed this before. Over in my browser, I can see there are little dotted lines underneath some of my components in my browser here. And I believe what that is telling me is it is projecting geometry from something inside of this component. So one of the things that is selected in my 4 selected items is something from this component right here, something from this component right here, something from this component right here, and then the 4th component that it is picking from is something from this bulb component here. So that's kind of interesting that you can see which components it's picking from. But not interesting enough for us to pause on this any longer. We're going to go ahead and click OK. Cool?
Yep.
Cool. All right, so now we need a method to mount those gears. So I'm imagining mounting those gears on just a bolt of some sort. So I think maybe a 1/4 inch bolt makes the most sense, or makes some sense, so why not? I suppose you could consider using the metric system here. I support your use of metric fasteners because they are better. But, and in fact, I do have a lot of M4 bolts. I am gonna choose to make this metric. So even though my drawing units are inches, I can just specify millimeters whenever I want to. So I can just type in like 4.25 millimeters. And that will give me a 4 1/4 millimeter opening, which will just be a slightest little bit of slop in order to let it spin freely on that bolt. So I'll just make that the 4.25 millimeters, and then I'll hit enter. And I'm actually going to do that same circle on all 4 of those center points. So I'll grab my circle tool again. It's the C key on the keyboard. I'll type in 4.25 millimeters for each one of the center points here. So grab my circle tool again, 4.25 millimeters. And you can see it automatically does that conversion because my document units are set to be in inches. So it's always going to show me inches when I'm in the sketch or when I'm not currently editing that particular measurement, 4.25 millimeters. But you can see if I double click on any one of these measurements, it shows me the units that I typed in. So it's not going to show me 0.167 inches when I click on it to edit the measurement. It's going to show me the units and numbers that I typed in. I don't know why I can't click on that. We're going to move on from it right now. All right, so we've got a hole for our bolts to go through. We should probably support those bolts with some meat around the outside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and, and you know what I'm realizing is one of these is not going to be
The one on the far right,
the one,
light bulb coming
yeah,
through it.
exactly. The one on the far right has a light bulb going through it, and that is actually 1.5 inches. So that opening is going to be significantly bigger. All right. So now we should create a little bit of meat for those screws to hold on to. And I think I'm going to choose to do that with an offset. So we could just grab our circle tool again, and I could specify a center point, and I could, draw out, 2 inches or 2.5 inches if I wanted to. But instead of doing that, I'm going to instead choose to do that with an offset. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Offset option. And now I can specify the curve that I want to offset, and now a distance that I want to offset it. So if I want to make a 1/2 inch offset, I just have to type in that 1/2 inch there and then say OK. So now I can do that same offset for my other 3 4mm circles that I made. So from the Modify menu, I'll go ahead and grab the Offset tool. It's the O key on the keyboard for those of you keeping score at home. I'll specify the curve that I'm going to offset, the distance of 1/2 inch, and then I'll move on. I'll offset this one here, 1/2 inch. Sometimes offsets work in mysterious ways, just like the solar system. You need to, sometimes you need to try it one way, and then if it doesn't work, try it the other way. And by that I mean, sometimes you have to use a negative number when you're offsetting something, and sometimes you have to use a positive number. And my only way that I have to tell if it should be negative or positive is just to try one way, and then if that doesn't look correct, like if I had wanted to offset this inside of my 4mm circle, obviously I could not offset it 1/2 inch inside of a 4mm circle because math. But if it's moving in the wrong direction, you just have to try switching that negative to a positive. Turn that frown upside down, swap your negatives to your positives, and everything's going to be right as rain. All right. So now we've got some individual mounts for each one of our gears, right? Each one of our gear sets can mount to this little circle bit down here, but we need a bar that connects them all together. So I'm going to grab my line tool, and I suppose this is where you could have some creative freedom. If you wanted to, we could draw curves. So here, let's do this in two different ways, just for fun here. So I'm going to start by grabbing my line tool. So I'll go ahead and grab from my create menu, I'll grab my line tool. And I'm going to zoom in here because I'm going to connect these two circles together just by clicking on one of the circles. And then I can click on my other circle here, and I've got them connected together. Now, that line doesn't connect very nicely to those circles, so we can add some constraints to make sure that this line is tangent to this circle and this line is tangent to this circle as well. Just from our constraints menu, we can come up to the tangent option, and I can specify my circle and my line that I want to be tangent to each other. And there you can see I got that little icon going on there. I'm going to do that same thing on the other side. So there we've got a nice line there. I'm going to do that operation again here. Let me just show you a different way to do it. If before I click to start the beginning of my line, if I hold down the shift key, so I'm just holding down the shift key, and now I've clicked to place the first part of my line, now you can see I've got an interesting movement that's happening here. So my line is forcing it, by holding down the shift key, I'm forcing it to be tangent to that circle that I just clicked on. I'm kind of adding that constraint right off the get-go. And now I can move my mouse until I hover over the other circle, and I get that same little blue circle with a blue line underneath it. That is my tangent constraint. And it's kind of showing me that it's snapping to that tangent constraint. And if I go ahead and click on that, then we can see that both of those tangent constraints are kind of added right from the beginning. So let's do that same method here to connect our next circles. So I'm going to hold down the shift key. I'm going to click on the first circle here, and now I'm going to move my mouse over to my second circle until I get that little tangent constraint that pops up there, and then I'll click to place that point. Do that same operation down here, holding down the shift key, so you can see I'm forcing it to be tangent to that circle, and then moving it over to my third circle until I get that tangent constraint snap pop up, and then I'll go ahead and click to place that point. Now, to connect to our last circle, I want to give it a little bit of character. So we could just draw a straight line that would connect this circle to connect our circles together. But instead, I'd like to do that with a curve. So I want to connect these two circles with a curve. And we can do that the same way we did our first line connections. So that first line we made, we'll use that same method here. So from my create menu, I'll go ahead and grab my arc and my 3-point arc tool. And I'll choose that 3-point arc tool. And I'm just going to click anywhere on my first circle. It doesn't really matter where, but I kind of want to get close-ish to where I want it to be in the end. So I'm just going to click somewhere near where I want it to be. And then over here too, it doesn't have to be anywhere in particular. Now something we don't want to do is here we can see that I'm getting some sort of snapping indication. So I've got a little blue X that's appearing over my cursor when I want to put it here. I actually want to avoid any of those kind of snapping indicators when I'm placing this line, because I want to force it to be where I want it to be later. And if it's already got a constraint, you know, because it's snapping to some sort of point here, then it may move in unpredictable ways when I try to move it by adding constraints later on. So I'm going to make sure that I don't get any of those weird kind of snapping indicators. A real popular one is like if you're snapping over near the middle point of a line, sometimes it'll be like, oh, here, let me give you that midpoint constraint. But if you want to move something later with a constraint, then that midpoint conflicts with it, and you have to try to delete constraints after the fact. Anyway, so kind of a tangent there, but see what I did there? Tangent, because we're making tangent constraints. That was unintentional. Okay, so now I'm just going to place this curve in any way, shape, or form. And the reason I'm not really focusing too much about what this curve looks like is the radius of the curve is going to be determined by the tangency points on each one of my circles. So if it's going to be tangent, it can only really be a couple of different curves. Actually, it really can probably only be one curve if it's tangent to two circles. So now we can add that constraint just like we did the first time. So from the constraints menu here, I'll come over to this tangent option, and then same deal here. So I'll pick the curve that I want to be tangent and the circle that I want it to be tangent to. And it moved in a funky way. Hopefully when I click on these two items, that is exactly what I did not want to happen. So let's try that one more time. Let's try making our curve. And this time I'm going to try making a tangent to the large circle first. So constraints, tangent, there. That's interesting. Really likes moving that. If I move this up here, and then I say constraints, oh, doesn't want to let me, it didn't want to let me, here I have my constraints menu open, and it's like, hey, tangent is grayed out. How come it wouldn't let me pick tangent? That is because I have something selected. So I've got my little point selected because I just moved it like this. So it won't let me choose the tangent option until I kind of like click off into the middle of nowhere. And now I don't have anything selected. So now I can choose the tangent constraint here. And hopefully, there we go. Now it's behaving more. All right, cool. I'm gonna do that same thing to the other side. Is there a way? This curve can probably be more than one radius, now that I'm thinking about it, and still be tangent to our circles here. In fact, you know, I'd like this curve to be different. So I think I want to try adding one more constraint. So I've got these 2 points here. These 2 points are where, this is where my straight line stopped. and this is where my curvy line stops. I'm kind of wondering if I can add a constraint that will make those 2 points exist at the same point, same place. And I'm going to try using the coincident constraint. Sometimes when I go off the rails like this, things tend to go drastically wrong. But this coincident constraint, look at that, hey, all right. So now, that's a much nicer curved transition between the straight line to this curved line here. I'm going to do that to the other side. So I'll go ahead and create a 3-point arc, just so everybody can see me do this again. I'll click like pretty much near, in fact, I could probably avoid that problem of adding the constraint, but it's kind of fun to learn how to use constraints here. So I'm going to hover kind of near where that curve needs to be, and then I'll place that arc, right? So now I'll add my tangent constraints. So I'll come up to my constraints menu, I'll choose the tangent option, I'll click on the arc that I made, and then I'll click on the large circle, and that becomes nicely tangent. I'll click on the arc I made, and then I'll click on the smaller circle, and that becomes nicely tangent. And it looks like those, oh, not quite. They're not quite on each other. So I am gonna add that coincident constraint to those points, even though, here, tell you what, I wonder if I can exaggerate this, just because it's really difficult to tell. There we go. So if I just move that point over, now we can see that these points aren't on top of each other, and we want them to be. So from my constraints menu, if I choose coincident, and now I can specify both of my points, and then boom, they now are constrained, so they're right on top of each other. I'm not sure why this arc is still blue. In my mind, that is a fully constrained arc, because it's locked in position. I guess it hasn't really have a, yeah, I don't know why that's a blue line. In my mind, that should be a fully constrained curve. But that's all right. We're going to move on. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. And now we can extrude out some of those items in that sketch that we just made. So from the create menu, I'll go ahead and choose extrude. And the parts of this sketch that I want to extrude is basically everything except for our 4mm, our whatever kind of circles we've got going on. So the little 4mm circles at the centers of each one of our gears, we don't want to extrude those, and we don't want to extrude the 1.5-inch radius circle that our light bulb needs to fit through there. But all of those other kibbles and bits, those will all get extruded. I believe we'll make this out of 5mm. For some reason, error. I very rarely had an error on a simple extrusion. Cannot complete extrusion. That's really interesting. What if I...
5mm, you say?
Yeah, I was attempting to make it 5mm.
Mine says it's okay.
Cannot complete extrusion. This extrusion profile is not valid. Try changing the profile. Not valid, huh? Let's try isolating it. Let's not make my computer draw other stuff. What if I just do part of it? I can do that part. Can I do that part? Can do that part? And that part? So something about this bit over here. It won't, something about all of this it doesn't like. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit this sketch. If I hover over it, it's kind of something weird is going on here. I got a weird line that's being made here. I'm gonna draw another circle. I'm just gonna grab my circle tool and I'm just gonna draw a circle right on top of that circle. And now it seems to be doing just fine. So before, when I click on this interior part, I've got like a weird extra line going on here. I don't know what's causing all that jaggedness, because it's just an offset line.
You have a red, Kevin, you have a red half circle. See that, Carl?
Yeah. And I don't know why that's turning up red.
You pissed it off.
I know, right? I made it angry.
I think with your tangents.
I'm going to delete it. I'm going to draw it in there again. Yeah, super weird. So I'm going to go ahead and say try this again now. So extrude. Five millimeters. There we go. I mean, it's going to do it there. I'm not sure what was wrong with that sketch, but if I just redrew that one circle, and kind of my process of elimination there was, all right, so it wants me to select different profiles.
Right.
So I was just like, well, all right, well, which one of these profiles is causing the problem here? So is it, will it let me extrude all of this? And it would let me extrude all of this, and once I added this, then it was like, nope. So that's how it kind of told me, or that's how I inferred that that was where my problem was. All right, so now I'm making a new body here, and we're going to say okily dokily. Now, the next thing I want to do here is I've got a length that is a little bit more than 14 inches here. And there's going to be gears on the end of this thing, and so I think we need some more support on this bar here. I think it's going to sag if we don't have support on it. So I'm going to choose to draw, and here we should name our sketches. This is our frame bar. And then we've got a body to name here. We've been doing so good at like naming everything here that I want to try to keep that organization going here. This is our frame bar, or gear mounts, or however you want to name that.
Bottom frame.
Bottom frame, that's a good one. So now I'm going to turn off that sketch, and let's make my gears viewable again, just so I can see what side of this I'm on. Alright, so on the bottom of this piece, I just want to draw a couple of extra bars that I can weld on to this bar just to give it some rigidity. So if I look at the bottom of this frame here, and I come up to my Create menu and choose Create Sketch. I'm going to create a sketch on the bottom of my bottom frame here. And I'm just going to draw 2 rectangles. So from the Create menu, I'm going to come up to Rectangle and 2-point rectangle. I'm going to start my 2-point rectangle kind of at this end point here where my straight line turns into a half a circle here, and I get the little snapping point that is an end point to that straight line. So I'm going to click and place my starting point of my 2-point rectangle there, and then I'm just going to move this over like almost all the way down, and 13 inches looks like for me a good spot. We just need a long vertical support structure down here of some sort. So, and then I'm going to make this out of that same 5mm thick material. So I'll make this 13 inches by 5mm. Maybe it's weird to mix metric and the English system together, but if I'm planning on buying 5mm stock for this, just that's my stock thickness, so it is what it is. So 13 by 5, and 13 is kind of arbitrary. I just want to get close-ish to the end here without going too far. The reason I don't want to go too close to this circle is because there is going to be a bearing here, so we just need to have a space for our bearing. It's going to be supported on a bearing. Alright, so 13 by 5mm, and then hit enter. I'm going to do that same thing on the other side. So from my Create menu, I'll go ahead and choose Rectangle, and then 2-point rectangle. I'll click to place the endpoint on kind of the opposite side of that frame piece. And again, this is going to be 5mm by 13 inches. Tab will bounce me back and forth between those 2 measurements there. And then I'll say OK. And I'm also going to say Finish Sketch. Now I suppose I could have drawn that all on the same sketch. I chose not to. Maybe there's a best practice here, but they seem like separate items. I don't know. It's probably a moot point. Either way you want to do it is fine. But this sketch I'm going to name my frame support. And now my frame support. Now that my frame support sketch has been named, now I'm going to extrude it. So from my Create menu, I'll go ahead and choose the Extrude option. I'm going to choose each one of those rectangles that I just made there. And I'm going to come down 1/2 inch. That'll probably be phenomenally adequate for a for support there, just to keep that bar from bending from the weight of the gears, because we do want those gears to line up really nicely and stay nice and flat. So just give it a little 1/2 inch support there. Instead of join on the operation, I am going to make this a new body, or rather 2 new bodies, because these 2 things do not touch each other. So as we extrude that out 1/2 inch and make them new bodies, and I click OK, then we have 2 new bodies that appear over in our bodies folder in our frame component. So I'm going to go ahead and name this support 1, support 1, and support 2. support aft and support forward, or you know, or whatever you want to, whatever trips your fancy. The last thing that I'm gonna do to this is I just want to give it a little bit of character or dressing, let's say. So right now the end of this just is kind of an abrupt stop. I'm going to go ahead and add a chamfer to this, to both sides of this. So if I, from my modify menu, choose the chamfer option, I suppose a fillet would also be fine if you wanted to do a fillet. But I'm going to pick I'm going to pick all 4 sides right at the same time. So kind of the end corner pieces, these just look a little harsh to me. They just look a little abrupt. And I'd like to soften those up a little bit. So I'm just going to make a 1/2 of an inch chamfer on each one of those sides, and that dresses that up a lot for me. So I think that looks a lot better. All right, cool. I'm gonna turn off that sketch because we're done using it. The last thing that I want to do in this class is I want to get the planets in there, the planet and the moon. So we have our 14-tooth gear component that exists. It's the very last gear we made, and I want to create 2 spheres, but I want to create them inside of this gear component. And the reason I want to do this is this gear is already set, this component is already set to rotate at the right speed and pace and mesh with the gear next to it. And my moon is going to rotate around, sorry, not my moon, the moon is going to rotate around the Earth right here, because the moon doesn't belong to me. The moon belongs to all of us. In fact, there are special treaties that say you can't own the moon. And I'm sure that every country for the eternity of human civilization, which unfortunately is probably not that much longer, will always adhere to that treaty of not owning the moon. And nobody will ever break that rule. Okay, so now, anyway, I'm going to click on the little radio button next to that 14-tooth gear component to make it my active component. I can see that it becomes not all ghosted out like it was before. I can even take this little triangle and spin it down here so I can see my bodies folder here. I'm going to not force myself to name this body because it's inside of the named component and it's the only body right now. We'd have to do that to all the bodies or all the components, and ain't nobody got time for that. But we do have time to create a couple of spheres. So from the create menu, I'm going to come down to this sphere option. I'm going to choose to create my sphere on one of these planes that is kind of a horizontal, vertical to my runs tangent to or perpendicular to the gear. So that one right there will work just fine. It's always kind of weird to me that you have to, when you create a sphere, you have to first start by telling it what plane, what two-dimensional plane you want to draw on. 2 inches. That seems like a really big Earth for this model. I mean, although 1 inch is still super huge for this model. I don't think Jupiter would be this big on this scale, but we're gonna go with 1 inch just so we're not putting a grain of rice up here. which is probably more accurate for the scale. I'm just thinking about how big our light bulb is. Like if our light bulb is the sun, then Earth would be really teeny. So maybe we'll forego scale in this one case. And I'm going to say OK here because we're making a new body. And I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to come up to the Create menu. I'm going to come down to the Sphere option. I'm going to create that sphere on the same plane as I created my Earth on. And then I'm going to place it somewhere over here-ish. I should probably be thinking about these distances, but I'm not. And now the Earth, or the Sun, the Moon is about a third the size of the Earth. Is that
Sounds about right.
is that true? The beautiful thing about these spheres is it's easy to change them later. So I'm going to start with 0.325 inches there, which seems like a good place to start, and I'm going to say OK. So now we've got these two sphere icons that are down here in our timeline. Here we've got a couple of bodies. Here these I will name Earth and the Moon. All right. Oh, and hey, this is the Earth. All right, cool. So we've got the Earth and the Moon. I suppose the Earth ends with a F. All right. So now, in theory, and hopefully in practice, as I move like this gear here, yeah, look at that. That moon is moving around the Earth just like it should be. So cool. And just like the Earth Moon, this moon is tidally locked, so it's only showing us one face as it's moving around. I will say that when I actually make this model, I'm gonna try to find something that looks accurately the shape of our moon and print that out. I'm sure the features will be almost non-distinct, but maybe I'll just make both the moon and the Earth much bigger so I can have a cool looking moon. Do we want to do another thing in 8 minutes? Let's not. Let's not do another thing in 8 minutes. I was going to say we could, next class, we will connect our moon and our Earth to this gear here with some pipe. That's a hint. We're going to use some pipe, and we'll use the pipe tool. It's going to be fun. And then the other thing that we're going to do next week is we'll create the base over on this side. So all of our gears are connected together, but right now everything's still floating because our base isn't connected, or our light bulb and everything like that isn't connected to anything. So next week we'll draw the base and draw some pipe to connect these things together, and then we'll be able to generate some tool paths the week after that finally for our machining project. 6 weeks in, we're finally going to generate some tool paths. All right, cool. So next week, we'll see ya.
Okay.
All right.